On behalf of the Dresner family, I'd like to say Shalom, Uvruchim Habaim. Welcome all who are here with us this morning, whether in person, here at Temple Beth Tikvah Sanctuary, or live streaming from home. We come together as a community to not only say our final goodbyes to Rabbi Emeritus Dresner, but also to pay homage to the enormous legacy that he left behind. A few weeks ago, during Chanukah, our festival of lights, when Sai was still alive and with us, I wrote and read the following from this bima, from this stage. In the book of Proverbs, we find a most beautiful phrase, Nishmat Adam Ner Adonai, the soul of a human being is likened to God's candle. And so indeed, today we will celebrate a soul that was truly a shining light among our people. A few weeks ago, we were all here to applaud one man's illuminating legacy. And today we're here to pay tribute to a real mensch, a beacon of light who was just taken from us last Thursday night. Today we are here to show our love, appreciation, and humble gratitude to a man whose light was shining like a candle flickering in a darkened alley in this world. And now Rabbi Dresner's light is shining in a different realm of existence. As one of my colleagues, Rabbi Jeff Salkin, wrote, and I read this quote on Friday night. Rabbi Salkin wrote, Sai was a man of heroic principles. There is a sweet irony that he died as we approach Dr. King's birthday. Right about now, he and Dr. King are probably giving Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Holy God, our Holy God, a hard time. And to that, Rabbi Elissa Koppel added, and Al Vorspan is making them all laugh while they do it. Nishmat Adam Ner Adonai, and the soul of Rabbi Dresner, along with his amazing group of friends, is now shining in God's dwelling place. I don't believe in coincidences, and I do think that Sai was put to work as soon as he got to dwell with other giants like Dr. King and Al Vorspan. And God asked them to help protect and then release our colleague, Rabbi Charlie Crichton Walker, and 3 of his congregants who were taken as hostages by a terrorist during Shabbat service yesterday in Congregation Beth Israel, Colleyville, Texas. I do believe that Rabbi Dresner's hand was in it, and that he will continue to serve God and humanity from his new dwelling place, wherever that may be. So again, I'd like to thank you all for being with us this morning as we say goodbye to our beloved Rabbi Israel Sai Dresner, while holding his family members in our midst, surrounding them with our loving care. Avi, Tamar, Phyllis, Eileen, Natasha, Mark, Lev, and Sasha, we hold you all in our hearts and our prayers. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. And now, Cantor Romalis will chant Psalm 23.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through death's valley, I have no fear. For thou art with me, thy rod and staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Goodness and mercy shall follow me always. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Psalm 121. Esanai eleharim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim va'aretz. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is our guardian. God is our protection. At your right hand. The sun will not strike us by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard us from all harm. God will guard our soul. Your going and coming, our Rabbi Emeritus, I, Dresner, now and forever. לכל זמן ועת, לכל חפץ תחת השמיים, עת ללדת ועת למות, עת לטעת ועת לעקור נטוע. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. And now it is time to speak and listen. Words spoken lovingly in memory of our Rabbi Emeritus, Cy Dresner. And so now I'd like to invite up to the bima dear friend, Arthur Barchenko.
Who is Rabbi Israel Dresner? I say is because of what this man stands for and for what he has given to society by dedicating his life to Tikkun Olam, making this world a better place for all peoples. Rabbi Dresner will live on at Temple Beth Tikvah, in our community, our nation, and the state of Israel, a legend in his own time. Rabbi Dresner followed Rabbi Shacknai, our first full-time rabbi. I had the honor of knowing and working with both men. Rabbi Shacknai, during his short tenure as rabbi at Temple Beth Tikvah, developed lymphoma, a cancer that could not be treated at that time. Rabbi Dresner has been taken from us due to a cancer that ravaged his body, but not his mind. So I continued the Rabbi Israel Dresner lecture series up until the last week of his life. He wanted to continue to teach and to live. He always said that Judaism is about living and never giving up. Sai, as he was known by his friends, experienced both good times and bad during his life, but he always remained optimistic and always hoped and worked to fight injustices. Rabbi Dresner did not have a mean bone in his body. He treated all people the same, whether you agreed with him or not, whether you argued or spoke harshly for or against what he said or for what he stood for. You were his friend. Sai received such hate mail from people who did not agree with his positions on political issues or social justice that it turned my stomach. But Sai never uttered an ill word, never held a grudge, and always addressed people who disagreed with his views with respect. If you truly listened to what the man had to say, listened to what the man stood for, and listened to the wealth of knowledge that Rabbi Dresner brought and offered to us, you would recognize how lucky we were to have Sai as our rabbi during those trying years in which we faced problems both domestically and internationally. For the past 5 years, Sai was afforded the kuvvet he deserved, a rabbi as Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth Tikvah. I think it was 6 years, Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth Tikvah, our house of hope. Sai very much appreciated the honor and respect that Rabbi Mika afforded him and spoke about it every time we met, but never mentioned the years past where he was not given the respect he deserved. Rabbi Dresner stood for right over might and was ready to stand for a cause if he felt it was right, was to stand up against it if he thought it was wrong. Sai put his name and life on the line on numerous occasions during the civil rights movement along with Dr. Martin Luther King, has fought against the plight of the Palestinian people, and has been recognized for his contribution to society by religious leaders throughout our country, leaders of the Middle East, as well as our own President Barack Obama. Our rabbi has been a teacher and a practitioner of the true meaning of Judaism by living tikkun olam, standing up and fighting for morality and justice, shaped our thinking and influenced those that listened and understood who we are as a people. He had a major impact on helping shape my life and worldview. We would meet for lunch or dinner every 6 weeks and discussed family events, always family first, temple activities, domestic and international politics, of course, world history. Inevitably, people would finish their meal way before us and stop by the table to thank Sai for a most enjoyable and educational luncheon. Through the years, we've shared life's long, complex journey together. A journey that was enriching in many ways and stressful at times, but never did I experience anything but his love for all peoples and hope for mankind. But on December 19th, Sai, Tamar, and I had brunch together at Brightview. As usual, we discussed history and politics. It was the first time I heard Sai state his concern as to how fragile our democracy is, concern for his children and grandchildren based on what is taking place in our nation today. So I believe it is important for us to carry on his legacy by standing for right over might, by helping ensure that the democracy he loved and worked for survives and flourishes going forward. Rabbi Dresner has been an integral part of my family's life cycle events, from baby namings to marriage and to the life-ending events of my loved ones. It has been an honor and a privilege to have been a friend of Sai's for all these years. So today I only say to B.R.E.T., see you soon and not goodbye. Sai did not fear death and believed that his neshama, his soul, would continue to live on. I look forward to the day that we will be discussing politics and history together again. May you rest in peace, my friend.
I would now like to invite up to the bima Janice Paul.
We have lost several great civil rights leaders of late. John Lewis was one who made good trouble. Desmond Tutu was called a rabble-rouser for peace. Both were moral optimists, and all of those descriptions were true of Rabbi Dresner as well. This past Thursday night, we lost another great civil rights leader, and that side of his life will be well-deservedly told for many years to come. But I want to take just a few moments to share the Rabbi Dresner, who was my rabbi, my teacher, my mentor, a father figure, and a hero to me. Of course, there have been a lifetime of milestones in which he participated for 3 generations of my family. But it was the other off the bima times we shared that meant as much. I will miss how he would call me and say, "Janice, it's Rabbi." Sometimes he would call and say, "I just wanted to hear your voice." I will miss much, but mostly I am extraordinarily grateful and consider myself extraordinarily lucky and privileged to have had him in the inner circle of my life. I am grateful for our breakfasts together, where he would share stories of his family, his youth, his college days, his days in the Army. We would talk about our families, parenting, Israel, Israeli politics, US politics, the temple politics, and baseball. And we still loved each other, even though he was a Mets fan and I rooted for the Yankees. I am grateful for how he genuinely cared and took the time to both show support and make things into teaching moments at the same time. When my son was born, someone of influence told me that the Hebrew middle name I had chosen was not a good name. I shared that with Rabbi Dresner, and the next thing I knew, he had actually taken the time to find every single time that name appeared in the Torah. Turns out it was 8 different instances given to perfectly good people, including the grandson of Jacob, the Jacob. I still have the piece of paper he gave me with each chapter and verse mentioned right here. I stuck with the name I had chosen. And I can't even express to you how much it meant to me when Rabbi Dresner said the priestly benediction over my son at his breast. When my son was 15, he entered an essay writing contest wherein the topic was My Jewish Hero. He wrote about Rabbi Dresner, and he won. And we took Rabbi Dresner with us to the celebratory luncheon the sponsoring foundation gave at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Afterwards, Rabbi Dresner wrote a note to Andrew on a traditional, maybe 3x5 thank you card that was crammed in his nearly unreadable, but not to me, scrawl that somehow packed in commentary on the 12 tribes, the 10 commandments, the 5 books of the Torah, and oh yeah, thanking him for the honor of being written about. That little card was also a forever keeper document for me. Every single time I saw him, which I'm lucky to say was often, he would ask about my mother, my sister, my brother-in-law, my son. Before the pandemic, we spent several Thanksgivings together. He hasn't stopped talking about Robert's cooking since. I am grateful for the car rides we took together to either pick up his guests for the annual Tikkun Olam lecture he sponsored, or when we took those guests back to their apartments or to the airport. Those car rides, when I would just sit as a sponge as I drove, soaking in the conversations between him and Andrew Young, or him and Reverend Kenyon, or him and Rabbi Saperstein, or him and Al Vorspan, were among my favorite times. He always thanked me profusely for the work I had done in making those lectures possible. But it is I who am grateful to have had the opportunity. And I will honor the promise I have made to him in recent weeks to make sure that that lecture in his name will continue as soon as we are able and for years to come. I am grateful for the support and guidance he gave when I was president of Temple Beth Tikvah. I would always smile when he would tell people that I was his first bar bat mitzvah student to become president of Temple Beth Tikvah. I knew he was proud of me. Rabbi Dresner was an example to me of what character, in the very best sense of the word, really means. He of the great big voice didn't just talk, though he certainly did that, loud and long. But equally importantly, he walked the walk. He had integrity. He was never afraid to take a stance, even when he knew it would draw backlash. He had the courage of his convictions, and that is very, very rare to find in a person. And so I am grateful for his example. I always learned something from him, whether I was at one of his fire and brimstone sermons he gave when still in our pulpit, or at one of his daytime lectures in the years that followed. Whether it was when spending 6 weeks together in Israel the summer I turned 16, or on one of our many field trips during my Hebrew school years, or when just sitting with him side by side in side-by-side chairs during his retirement years. I always learn something. I confidently believe I can speak for an entire generation of his students who can say the same about Rabbi Dresner, our teacher. And so I am grateful to him for sharing his fount of knowledge. He liked to say that he was the human Google before there was such a thing as Google. I treasure the times we shared. I treasure the memories I keep. Many people cross our paths in life. Fewer people really have a lasting impact on us, and fewer still change us. Having Rabbi Dresner in my life has changed me profoundly, and I shall always be grateful for that. He lived for 92 years, 8 months, and 22 days, well past what the actuarial tables had predicted. And he did so uniquely, his way, and based on a strong and unwavering moral foundation. I thank him for the more than 51 years, 6 months, and 13 days that he served as inspiration and comfort in my life and in the lives of so many congregants of Temple Beth Tikvah. I will always be grateful that Rabbi Dresner was part of my journey, a part of our journey, and I thank him for always being there. My great aunt, who actually lived to 103, used to say in her latter years, in Yiddish, what translated to, a heart feels a heart. I don't believe that ends with death, and so I continue to offer Rabbi my gratitude, my respect, my love, and my awe. Indeed, I take solace in a question I asked him just a couple of weeks ago during one of our frequent visits of late. I wanted to know if he believed in life after death, not what Judaism taught, but what he believed. And as Arthur made reference to, he told me that he did believe his neshama, his soul, would live on. I believe that too. I want to close with a poem by Maya Angelou that reads in part, when great trees fall, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always, irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration, our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. Rabbi Israel Dresner existed, and I am better because of him. All of us here today are better because of him. Rest in peace, Rabbi. I love you.
Thank you, Janice. Next, I'd like to invite up to the bima Michael Rudolph.
When Rabbi Dresner asked me to be one of the speakers at his funeral, I asked how many there would be. Maybe a lot, he said. My next question was, how much time will I have? I don't know, but don't talk too long. We don't want the service to last all day. That was ironic, coming from a person who was known for 55-minute sermons. I recently learned that I have 7 minutes, and I'm going to try to do that. You're hearing talks from 4 people with different points of view, but you should see that there is a common thread through all of them. Activist, Zionist, feminist, pacifist, optimist. These words describe the man whose life we honor today. If you roll all of those 5 words into one, you could simply say rabbi. Rabbi means teacher. From 1970, when he arrived at Temple Beth Tikvah, until 1982, I considered Israel Dresner to be a teacher. We didn't really have a personal relationship. I always called him Rabbi. I was intrigued by his marathon sermons, in which he provided information on a myriad of subjects. I quickly realized that each sermon had a beginning and a middle and an end, which tied into the beginning. You just had to listen, stay awake, and follow his train of thought. I never fell asleep. There was too much to absorb to miss even one word, and his booming voice kept everybody awake, well, almost everybody. I thought the ease with which he could discuss so many subjects was the result of meticulous research as he prepared his sermons. It wasn't until much later that I learned how he was able to deliver sermons extemporaneously. Extemporaneously. Webster's dictionary describes extemporaneously as carefully prepared but delivered without notes or text. Anyone who heard Sai's sermons will remember that he did not read them. He had notes written on scraps of paper in his chicken scratch. How he could even see what he had written was always a mystery to me. The darkest day I remember in my 53 years as a member of the temple was the congregational meeting in, I think it was 1983, when there was a vote regarding the renewal of his contract. The vote was close, very close. It was a question as to the outcome. The meeting ended in chaos, without a decision, and then there was a lawsuit. It was settled by an agreement that there would be a new vote 5 or 6 months later. He won handily. It was during the interim that I got to know the rabbi on a personal level, and I became his friend, not just another congregant. And he became Sai to me, not Rabbi. I knew Sai had an encyclopedic knowledge of US and world history, domestic Middle East and international history, international politics, geography, and statistics. I eventually learned that he had a photographic memory, which is what enabled him to deliver sermons extemporaneously. Let me share a few of my many experiences that demonstrated the depth of his knowledge. In February 1987, I stopped in to Sai's office at the temple and told him that Pina and I had just returned from a trip to the Dominican Republic, where we visited a little town named Sosua. I was surprised to find a small shul that held Shabbat services every other Friday night. I said it appeared there were 48 member families. No, he said, not that many. I think 23, maybe 22. No, maybe 23. And if you knew him, you knew that this was a ploy that he always used during his sermons. He walked over to the bookshelves that held some of his 7,000 books, and almost without looking, he reached in and he pulled out a small, thin book, the title of which was Jewish Population of Cities Throughout the World. He opened it almost immediately to a page, and he said, here, Dominican Republic, just a minute. And he leafed through a couple of pages. Sosua, 23 Jewish families. He then proceeded to tell me that Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, was a terrible guy, but he was the only head of state in the Western Hemisphere who allowed Jews escaping from the Holocaust to land in his country. And did I know that Jews dominated the dairy industry in the Dominican Republic? And he then proceeded to explain in great detail how the dairy industry worked and how the Jews controlled the dairy industry, and so on. If I hadn't been there, I would not have believed it, but I saw it with my own eyes. It was almost like watching a magician do one of these tricks that you don't know how they do. That's what he did that day. Speaking of books, he was a frequent visitor to our house for dinner. He had a hearty appetite. He loved Pina's pasta. We never had leftovers. He always brought a book or a set of books, always about Judaica. Knowing that Pina comes from Italy, he once brought her a copy of The Garden of the Finzi Continis, to which he added a warm inscription. One year I told Sai that my son Stephen was living in India and was intrigued by a branch of Hinduism. He proceeded to assuring me immediately that the Krishna movement was not a cult. I had nothing to worry about. He'd probably eventually get over it. Not all people who followed Krishna consciousness shaved their heads, wore saffron robes, and chanted incessantly. He followed this with a complete explanation of Hare Krishna, and then gave me statistics on how many Jews there were in India, and finished up with how many Jews there were in Japan, where Stephen had spent 3 years before that. What I cherished most about our relationship was breakfasts and lunches. He was a regular at the King George Diner. When Pina and I moved to Kinnelon, we would meet at the Pompton Queen on Route 23. It was more convenient for me and not so bad for him. Breakfast was a 2-hour affair. He always began by asking me questions about my parents, my children, Pina, me, our families. We would eventually get to politics, Israel, baseball, history, predictions. The topic was whatever was on his mind that day or whatever was in the newspaper. If he got there before me, he would be entrenched with his nose in the New York Times, which he, I think, read cover to cover every day. One morning, he finished a lengthy explanation about the situation in Israel. Then he got up to go to the men's room. There was a woman sitting in a booth across the aisle from us. She turned to me and said, "Who is that man? He is so interesting. I finished eating half an hour ago, but I couldn't leave." He ended every meeting with me by making me promise to give Pina his love. She loved him as he loved her. The last time I saw Sai was a couple of weeks ago, when he made final changes to his will. One provision leaves his book collection to Temple Beth Tikvah. Avi pointed out that the temple has already received most of the valuable books. Those that are left are not that important. Avi then suggested, tongue-in-cheek, that it would be a fitting gesture for Sai to deliver the remaining books to the American Nazi Party so that they could have a bonfire. Sai loved the idea. Those of you who know his laugh, I call it a guffaw. I never heard him laugh so much in all my life. I'm sad to have lost a friend, but I am comforted to know that the last time I saw him, I left with a smile on my face. I share with Rabbi Mika a belief that there is no such thing as coincidence. This morning when I got in the car to make the 15-minute trip to the temple, I turned on the radio and there was a CD and it was playing different arias sung by Luciano Pavarotti, one of our favorites. As I got off Route 46 onto Riverview Drive, the song changed and he was singing Volare. Volare means fly up to the sky. How fitting that it would happen today. Sai, I was privileged to be your friend. I loved you. I will miss you. I will remember you always.
Thank you, Michael. Next, I'd like to invite up to the bima Lynn Cooper.
As prologue to my eulogy, I'd just like to share something with you. When I heard of Rabbi Dresner's final diagnosis, he called to tell me personally what happened. He had 3 things to tell me. One was the news wasn't good. He had stage 4 cancer, and he didn't have much time. 2, when he was born in 1929, the anticipated lifespan of a white American male was 62.3 years, and God had given him 92 and a half years so far. That wasn't bad, and he wasn't afraid of dying. And 3, he expected me to speak at his funeral. We've all seen and read and heard all of the tributes that preceded the death of Rabbi Israel S. Dresner, the civil rights icon who marched and risked his safety alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the man known as the most arrested rabbi, the anti-Vietnam War activist who loudly and clearly expressed his opposition, the proponent of human rights for all, the indefatigable champion of all things liberal. But what I think has gotten lost amid all these tributes is the Rabbi Dresner who occupied this pulpit at Temple Beth Tikvah in Wayne, New Jersey for 25 years, and then held the title of Rabbi Emeritus for another 27 after he retired. That's the Rabbi Dresner that I and my fellow congregants knew and remember as we reflect on his passing. Rabbi Dresner arrived at our synagogue in 1970, tall and dark-haired and dark-bearded, with a booming voice that never needed a microphone to allow him to be heard. He approached his rabbinate at our synagogue as he approached everything in his life. No pretensions, no compromises, no softening of what were his very strong beliefs, and no softening of his booming voice and often controversial opinions. He was a force to be reckoned with. And reckon with him we did. Those 25 years of his rabbinate in Wayne were 25 of the most energizing, divisive, instructive, aggravating, and stimulating years in the history of our synagogue. We probably had more contentious congregational meetings dealing with his contract renewals than any other synagogue. But we also had more congregants attending services to hear what their rabbi had to say whenever there was an important event taking place here or in Israel or in any other place around the world. And we had numerous guest speakers of great renown who came here at the invitation of Cy Dresner, Al Vorspan, Rabbi Alexander Schindler, Herbert Tarr, Senator Frank Lautenberg, to name just a few. We had hundreds of our religious school students go on confirmation class trips to Israel, led by Rabbi Dresner. We had endless confirmation adult education classes, led by our rabbi and attended by a dedicated group of congregants. And we had a congregation made very much aware of all that was going on in the world through the sermons of our Rabbi Dresner. How will I remember him? I will remember him as the rabbi who, in the words of a former Wayne clergyman, the late Reverend Lloyd Kenyon, stretched our brains. Cy and I had monthly breakfasts through the years, and with every breakfast we had, I learned something new. I remember one day mentioning to Harvey that I never realized that Hawaii was one of the 5 smallest states in the United States of America. And Harvey responded by saying, "Did you have breakfast with Cy today?" I will remember him as the rabbi who was obsessed with statistics. He had a statistic for every occasion, such as the anniversary card Harvey and I received from him on our 45th wedding anniversary. It was a lovely card with a handwritten note that said, "Happy anniversary to an exceptional couple. Do you know that of all the people that were married in 1959, 62.9% are either divorced or dead?" I will remember the rabbi who came to my home to watch the first inauguration of Barack Obama and treated Harvey and me to an ongoing narrative of the history of the United States presidency. And he watched with great emotion as the first Black president of the United States was sworn into office. I will remember him as the rabbi who for 25 years provided conversation starters for the breakfasts that my husband and I hosted. His sermons were good for an entire night's conversation. In fact, our guests who were not members of Beth Tikvah would often arrive and ask what our rabbi had to say in his sermons. No one stimulated discussion as did Rabbi Dresner. I will remember him as the rabbi who never held a grudge and never forgot people who were kind to him. He really did believe that you could disagree without being disagreeable, and never considered his detractors as vicious or evil people, merely misinformed. I will remember him as the rabbi whom I refer to as having been woke before we knew what woke was. And not terribly long ago, as Janice said in her comments, Cy reminded me that before Google, he was the source of information for many of his congregants and acquaintances who needed quick answers to their questions regarding history, Judaism, Israel, and anything else they wanted to know. His incredible memory made him a walking, talking encyclopedia, and we were all aware of that. Cy and I were once ending one of our breakfasts when a man and woman passed our temple on their way out of the diner. The woman stopped at our table and asked Rabbi Dresner if he was a rabbi. She said she couldn't help but hear our conversation. He introduced himself, and she told him that her brother had written a book that dealt with the discussion we had had that morning. Cy asked what her brother's name was, and when she replied, he told her the name of the book, that he had read it when it was published in 1976, and that he disagreed with something her brother had written in chapter 3. I left the diner at that point. I don't know how long their conversation lasted. I will remember him as my rabbi, and I will remember him as my friend, a very loyal friend, a friend who never desired great wealth or an elaborate lifestyle or expensive clothing, but a friend whose passion for learning and human kindness ruled his life. I have become a better person through my relationship with Rabbi Dresner, and will always be grateful to him for opening up my mind to the philosophy of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. He made it clear that I, as does each of us, have the opportunity to participate in that endeavor one step at a time. To Avi, Natasha, Lev, and Sasha, to Tamar and Mark, to Eileen and Phyllis, I extend my deepest sympathy. None of us have ever known anyone quite like Rabbi Israel S. Dresner, and none of us ever will. Rest in peace, my friend.
I would now like to invite back to his podium Cantor Charles Romalis.
I was so sad to learn that my dear friend, my clergy partner, and Rabbi Dresner, all the same person, passed away this past week. We were a great clergy team for 25 years. He and I served this congregation with dignity and with strength. When I heard the news of your diagnosis, I immediately sat down and began to write you a personal letter. I thought this way I could express to you how I really feel about you. So here we go. Dear Cy, from the very first day I met you, you were giving a lesson to a group of women of sisterhood. I believe it was at Mickey Pear's house at the time. Everyone was so impressed by the amount of knowledge you possessed. We can all agree that you were an extremely knowledgeable Jew and a brilliant scholar. Upon reflection, I just realized I sat and listened to approximately 2,700 sermons, probably more than anyone else in the world. Most of them were good. Most of them I stayed up for. But it was just a pleasure to hear him expand his knowledge and teach us. He was always teaching something from the Bima. Your sermons were filled with actual facts, numbers, names, first and last, places, and Jewish populations in just about every country, city, shtetl, and dates in history were at your fingertips. I remembered you telling me that you had a photographic memory that you just heard. Quick story about a photographic memory. Those of you who ever visited his office here at the temple, you walked in and you walked into a wall of books. Floor to ceiling, floor, all over the floor, desk, all over the desk, and so on. And I said, Sai, I have a question for you. He says, tell me. He said, I have this question about something. I don't exactly remember what it was. And I see him thinking at the time when I was telling him what I'm looking for. And he put his hand to his head and he says, I think I have it here. I think I have it here. And he started looking up at a shelf up on top. And he says, it's in that book. The answer to the question is in that book. And I believe it's on page 85. And guess what? That's exactly where it was. And that day it was just unbelievable. Your sermons were fire and brimstone, as someone else said as well, riveting, very controversial at times, and certainly thought-provoking. I always felt and continue to feel to this day that you were a great visionary on the themes of contemporary Jewish identity, community, and the world that we live in. You fought with all your heart and all your soul. You were an active leader in many organizations that work towards Tikkun Olam, the repairing of the world. And you served as scholar in residence and guest lecturer in many other synagogues, many organizations, always with rave reviews and controversy. Since you were a serious and observant Jew, a revered leader of 25 wonderful, interesting, and creative years, your shul, this shul, Temple Beth Tikvah, your house of hope, was yours to talk to the people of this congregation. Sai, you were a passionate Jew and a wonderful teacher of Torah and a religious leader of the highest quality. I have seen you inspire groups of kids, of lay people, as well as your rabbinic colleagues. The deepest desire of your life's work has always been to inspire Jews to Torah and to performing mitzvot, and to create a new vision for reinvigorating contemporary Jewish life. Sai, I don't know if you remember, you asked me as soon as you came to this congregation that you wanted me to do a folk rock service, which hadn't been done in many congregations in the country. I said, there'll be controversy. So he says, love it, love it. And so I put together a beautiful rock service, and it was beautiful, and he was right too. He says, there'll be controversy, and there was. But what happened at the end is that we had a rock service every year, and it got better and better and better. As a human being, I have always found you to be a kind, engaging man and a person of great integrity. As was said before, you never held a grudge. No matter how many people came at you forcefully, you never held a grudge to anybody. And I said, that is unbelievable. Because they gave him a hard time, many times. I mean, I lived through it too for 25 years, and I was sort of in the background, but I heard everything that went on. And they gave him a hard time. But he was right. He was forceful, and he did what he had to do for our congregation. So here's a reading I'd like to share with you that says what we all are saying about you. Our rabbis taught that there are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But they emphasized that the crown of a good name excels them all. The book of Ecclesiastes says, Tov Shem Mishem Tov. A good name is to be treasured above precious oil. Wealth, health, and even life passes away, but a good name lives forever. It is the view that the Talmud teaches, monuments need not be erected for the righteous. Their deeds are their memorials, and they will be remembered and revered for kindness that they have shown, and for the love they have given. They are shining examples of what it means to be a mensch. And you, Sai, fit that description. Obviously, nobody is perfect. I think it was about 1971 or so, we were asked to do a wedding together at the Crystal Plaza. And Sai said, I'll drive. And I didn't know about Sai driving. So we get into his car and we're driving, and it was a rainy night to get there. And I sensed that he was lost. So I said, Sai, do you know where we're going? He said, sure, I know where I'm going. We were going up the interstate exit ramp on 280. That's where we were going. So I said, Sai, I think you ought to turn around. He said, no, I'm sure this is the right way to go. Eventually he turned it around and we got there safely. But that was the last time I ever drove with him. And that was 24 years of not driving with him. We did weddings together, but I never drove with him. And there is this breakfast and lunch get-togethers that Sai always wanted to have. And I had one of those too. I was sitting at the King George Diner, that was known as the Dresner Diner, because that's where he had most of his breakfasts and lunches. And he was giving me a lesson on civil rights. I said, I know that when I sit down with Rabbi Dresner, I can ask him a question and I can sit back and listen for an hour and a half. And he said, I think we have to stop now, outside. But he gave me a wonderful lecture on civil rights. And as everybody knows, his voice is not mellow, and his voice was going through the diner. I would think about half the people that were listening to the lecture as well. And there was a group of women in the booth next to us, and they were listening intently. And when they finished their breakfast, they came over to us and they said, you're a man of great integrity. And he said, we really enjoyed your lecture on the civil rights. He said, thank you. And he said, don't forget, tell your friends that I am the rabbi that was with Martin Luther King in jail with him. And they looked at him and said, wow, it was a real treat for them. Not that being in jail, but it was a real treat. And the last story that I'd like to share with you is that he and I did another wedding at the Crystal Plaza in the city. It's a beautiful place, and the chapel is magnificent. But this particular chapel was lit only by candle. There were no electric lights like we see here. And before the ceremony, someone came up to the rabbi, I guess they were from the wedding party, and they said, Rabbi, please make the ceremony shorter. And he looked at them and smiled. And we knew what that meant. So 40 minutes into the ceremony, I said, Sai, quietly, of course, I said, Sai, the candles are melting. They're about halfway gone. He said, don't worry, I got this. 15 minutes later, we finished, and the candles were 3/4 of the way down, and it was getting dark. But when he wanted to finish something, he finished something. And of course, it had meaning, but there's where the controversies come in. You know, the people said it was beautiful, but too long. Okay. Back in 1980, we had a big party for Rabbi Dresner. I think Janice put that together for us. It was a beautiful, beautiful celebration. And I wrote words to a song that everybody knows, and I think they're appropriate today, and I would like to sing them to you. The melody is taken from Ledor Vador, and this is what I put down 12 and a half years ago, except that I used to say you are, and now I have to say you were. You were our gift, and you were our blessing, and you were history in song. You were our hope, and you were our healing. You taught us to be strong. You were words, and you were stories. You painted pictures of the past. You were a carrier of wisdom that can never be surpassed. Ledor vador nagid God lecha. Ledor vador, you protect this chain. From generation to generation, Ledor vador, your words will always praise God's name. Looking back on your journey, Tikkun Olam was in your heart. From your sermons to your teachings, you built a legacy from your heart. From Israel to the world around us, you made a difference for humankind. And your words that brought us meaning, we will have to the end of time. Ledor vador nagid God lecha. Ledor vador, you protect this chain. From generation to generation, Ledor vador, your words will always praise God's name. Rabbi Dresner, you were a true gift to all who knew you. You never lost that sense of wonder which stirred constantly within you. May your life be remembered, revered, and blessed for the kindness you have shown and for the love you have given. You are a shining example of what it means to be a mensch. Zecher tzadik livracha, may your name be remembered always as a blessing. I love you. Rest in peace. Charles.
Thank you, Cantor. Now I'd like to invite up to the bima Rabbi Sai's daughter, Tamar Dresner.
You'll forgive me in advance for not having a very cohesive eulogy. Avi has read this eulogy many times, and each time he's had the same criticism. When you tell a story, have a point. Then again, that never seemed to stop my father. I've had at least 9 weeks to write this eulogy, but every time I sat down to write, I just seemed to go off in a million different tangents. So instead of picking one, I just kept putting it off to the next day, and then the next day. And before I knew it, I had procrastinated all the way until yesterday. But I don't really feel that bad about that because, as everyone here knows, my father was the absolute king of going off on tangents. So Abba, this is for you. I can tell you without irony that Abba always thought that I was a genius. A few years ago, he called me late at night to tell me that I needed to come down to Wayne the next day. He had an emergency. I asked him over the phone what the emergency was, but he said, I can't tell you on the phone. Needless to say, I started freaking out, wondering what the big emergency might be. The next day, I rushed down to Wayne, and he brought me into the laundry room. In the 1980s, my mother had hung a piece of rope from one end of the room to the other to make an indoor clothesline. My father was now pointing at that rope on the floor. One end was still tied up to one side of the room, but the other end had come untied. Abba held his head in his hands. Tamar, I don't know what to do. I looked up at him, and I looked down at the rope, and I looked up to the heavens. My internal dialogue was ripe with expletives. Lev and Sasha, are you effing kidding me? This is the effing emergency? So I bent down to pick up the rope, and I tied it back onto the wall. I threw some laundry on it to make sure that it was secure, and I looked at Abba, who was looking at me with a kind of awe. Tamar, you're a genius, he said. On another visit, I pulled into the driveway, and Abba was standing outside his car, driver's side door open, head in his hands. I got out of my car and I went over to him. Abba, what's wrong? I don't know. I can't make it go forward. I can't make it go in reverse. The lights won't come on. I can't turn the steering wheel. So I sat down, and I immediately got back up, and I said, Abba, you need a key. And he said to me, Tamar, you're a genius. Tamar, my right hearing aid's not working. I look into his right ear, no hearing aid. I look into his left ear. Abba, you're wearing both your hearing aids in your left ear. Tamar, you're a genius. Tamar, my cell phone's not working. Abba, that's not a cell phone. It's the remote control for the TV. Tamar, you're a genius. Tamar, the toaster is not working. Abba, you need to plug it in. On yet another visit, I pulled into the driveway, Abba's car was not there. I got out of my car and I stood in front of the garage doors. And the left side garage door was open. And that was strange because Abba always parked his car on the right side of the garage. The left side of that garage had not been opened in probably 25 years. And it was a very small garage. I looked down, I shook my head, I took a deep breath, I crossed my arms, and I walked into the garage. I looked around. Huge holes in the right side wall. Huge car-shaped indentations in front of me in the back wall. Black paint all over the left wall. I walked around slowly, shaking my head the whole time. What the hell has Abba done now? Just then, I hear his car pull up in the driveway. So I step outside. He's parking his car. I'm looking at his car. It's bruised, dented, banged up to hell actually, pretty close to being totaled. Bumper is hanging off the front end, scraping the driveway. The side mirrors are both completely hanging off the sides of the car. And he gets out of the car with a big smile. Did you just get here? Abba, what happened in the garage? What do you mean? I point to the car and I motion to the garage. Oh, that. My garage door wouldn't open. You realize your car is totaled. I know, but I couldn't get my car out of the garage. I'm nodding. So let me get this straight. Your garage door wouldn't open. He's nodding. So you mean the garage door opener wasn't working, the clicker in your car, right? Right? Just the one in the car or also the one on the wall? He doesn't answer me. He just stares at me. Did you try changing the batteries in the one in the car? And he just stares at me. Did you call the temple handyman to come fix the garage door opener? He doesn't say anything. So you decided to turn the car around in the garage to get the car out the left-hand side door. He says, right. So you're going forward, reverse, forward, reverse, forward, reverse, hitting the garage every time, right? Did you know you were destroying the car? I don't know. Did you know you were destroying the garage? I guess so. How long did it take you to get out of the garage? An hour and 45 minutes. Abba, where were you going? I wasn't going anywhere. So you needed to get the car out of the garage to go nowhere. Right. Abba, you're a genius. When I was 19, Abba took me on a trip to England. We landed at Heathrow and we went to rent a car. When presented with all of the options, mid-size, compact, luxury, Abba, of course, opted for the cheapest car, which was a stick shift. Now, I'm no automotive engineer, but I thought it was a bad idea. We found the car in the parking lot. We put our luggage in, we got in, we buckled up. Maybe 5 minutes had elapsed since we had left the office. Abba puts the car into what he thinks is first gear, and we reverse all the way back into another parked car in the parking lot. So we go back into the office, and Abba tells the clerk at the desk what happened. And the clerk explains, maybe you should consider an automatic. Americans really seem to have a hard time figuring out the British stick shift. Is it more money? Abba asked. Yes, it's a little more. No, I'll take a stick shift. Back out into the parking lot, find the new rental, switch the luggage, get in, buckle up. Abba puts the car into what he thinks is reverse. We promptly lurch forward and drive over a median into a totally different parking lot where he hits another parked car. Back to the office, and I say, Abba, I really think you should get the automatic this time. Same clerk comes back over to us, and Abba explains what happened. The clerk says, sir, can I give you an automatic this time? It'll be the same price as the stick shift. And Abba says, I'll take it. He couldn't get out of the garage well. He couldn't get out of the garage safely, but he got out. It didn't matter to him that he totaled his car and ruined the garage in the process. Nothing was going to stop him from getting out and doing what he needed and wanted to do. He didn't even need to go anywhere. He just needed to be prepared to go somewhere. That was my dad. He wrecked not one, but 2 cars just so he could get the price he wanted. Some people define insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But my father didn't, Avi doesn't, and I don't. We call that perseverance. Doing the same thing over and over, not expecting a different result, but getting a different result.
Last but not least, Avi Dresner, please come up to the bima, and thank you to Mom.
Before I deliver these prepared remarks of a son to his father, I want to say a few words as a father to his sons. Lev and Sasha, I haven't felt like a very good papa recently because I've been trying to be a good son. Since Zeta was diagnosed about 2 months ago, I haven't been around much, going back and forth to New Jersey at first, and then living here in New Jersey for the last 3 weeks with him. And I'm sorry for that, but I know that you guys understood that I was where I needed to be, doing what I needed to do. And I just want to thank you for that. And you're going to get me back starting tonight. And I want to thank you. Natasha, my wife, I want to thank you for holding down the fort and for making it possible for me to be here with Tamar for these last few weeks. As you guys know, I'm not much of a sleeper. I don't sleep very much, and I don't sleep very well. I often find myself getting up in the middle of the night, and that has served me well for the last few weeks when Zeta would call out for me and for Aunt Tamar in the middle of the night and ask us to come to him. And it was not unlike when you guys were babies and you would call out in the middle of the night and Mama or I would have to come to you. And I found myself thinking about those experiences in much the same way as I was with Zeta at his deathbed these last few weeks, and especially the last few days, because the experience of watching him leave this world was not unlike the experience of watching you guys enter it through Mama. And watching Zeta leave this world, I flashed back to those moments in the maternity ward delivery room with you guys. And we were doing very similar things, Aunt Tom and I, for Zeta that I did for you when you were little. I won't go into the details. I think everybody knows what babies need. And in each instance, I found myself standing by a bedside, trying to be as supportive as I could, trying to be a good cheerleader, but ultimately feeling powerless, helpless, because I was not in control of that process, nor were the people going through that process in control, much as I thought they might be or tried to be. And so last night, again, I found myself waking up at some stupid hour in the morning, unable to sleep, and my mind drifted to thinking about Zeta's body in this coffin. And I started to cry. I woke Mama up, not that I intended to, but my crying woke her up, and she hugged me and she held me, and that was helpful. But the thing that helped the most was when I got up and I walked over to the pull-out bed that you guys were in the hotel. It's probably 3:30 in the morning this morning, and there you were, sleeping. The blanket had come off of you, so I straightened the blanket out and made sure it was on you both. And seeing your two bodies there, very much alive, was the perfect antidote to thinking about Zeta's body here, not alive. And I stopped crying. And so I want to thank you for that, even though you weren't even conscious for it, just like Zeta wasn't conscious for much of his last few days and weeks. So thinking about that juxtaposition of your bodies and his body, it made me think of our family, our nuclear family, the four of us as one body. And I thought about which parts we represented. Lev, even though your name means heart in Hebrew, you are the head of this family, and especially now that Zeta's gone. You are so much like him in so many ways, both good and bad. And that's one of the reasons we butt heads so much. But it's also one of the reasons that I love you so much. Sasha, as I told you yesterday, you are the heart of this family. You are empathy incarnate. And if you're not sure what empathy incarnate means, lean over and ask your wise ass older brother and he'll tell you. You've been my rock. You are the emotional anchor that I have, that has moored me through this whole time. And I told you that yesterday, and I'm telling everybody else that now, because they need to know. Natasha, you are the spine of this family. You have kept us upright. You have kept us moving forward. You've kept me upright and moving forward. And I just want to say thank you to you for that. As for me, I usually feel like the ass of this family. But today I'll be a little bit gentler to myself, and I'll say that I'm the funny bone of this family, or at least I try to be, although Tamar just gave me a good run for my money. So reference Michael, that's the extemporaneous portion of our programming. That's the family that I chose, and I wanted to honor them. So now I'm going to talk about the family that I didn't get to choose. I want to thank my sister, Tamar, for everything that she just said and for everything that she has done for our dad in these final years of his life, and especially in these final weeks and days. I only joined in the 24/7 phase a few weeks ago, and I am totally exhausted. She has been living it for 3 months. She's been a superhero, and Tom, the main reason Abba made it as long as he did and as well as he did is because of you. And I will forever be grateful to you for that, as you know that he was. I also want to thank everyone who's here with us at Temple Beth Tikvah, either in body or in spirit, watching at home. This sanctuary could easily have been filled to overflowing all the way to the back wall of the social hall, like it was when my father led Yontif services here. But given Omicron, that would have been irresponsible. And besides, this is no Yontif. It's not a good day. As those of you have seen in the recent media reports about him already know, Dad, Tamar, and I spent quite a bit of time talking about and planning for this day over the last couple months and over the last few weeks. First and foremost, we focused on the remainder of his life, joyfully ticking items off his bucket list together. And I'm happy to report that we got to almost all of them. We certainly got to all of the realistic ones. We also focused on his death. We picked this casket together. We worked on his obituary together, and we discussed the speakers and the eulogies. To me, he said, "Don't be funny," which was a bit like me saying to him, "Don't bring up the Austro-Hungarian Empire." He quickly relented and modified his statement to, "Don't be too funny." I wouldn't describe my dad as a funny guy, though he definitely appreciated a good sense of humor and a good joke. In his inimitably precise statistical way, as we've already heard, he told me that I was the third funniest person he had ever known. For the old-time Temple Beth Tikvah folks here and out there, his former congregants Bert Goodman and Irv Schoenblum were 1 and 2 on his list. But since they're unfortunately gone now too, I'm officially the funniest living person he knew. In case you're wondering, tomorrow was fourth on the list and is now second. Same as in birth order. Sorry, kid. Though Dad appreciated humor, he wasn't really a joke teller. But if he had been, it would probably have gone something like this. Knock, knock. Austro-Hungarian Empire. No, you all failed. You should know better than to say Austro-Hungarian Empire who to my dad. You'd get an hour-and-a-half long doctoral dissertation defense on it, though in truth he would have given it to you anyway, even if you didn't ask. In fact, death is the only thing that could keep him from answering that question and talking about that subject. My dad prided himself on knowing everything there was to know about the Austro-Hungarian Empire in particular, but about history more broadly. But my dad didn't just know history. He made history. And he is now permanently part of history. Of course, the part of history Cy Dresner will always be most closely associated with is civil rights and his friendship with Martin Luther King. They were born the same year. They marched on the same path, literally and figuratively, and they had much in common. Like my dad, Dr. King appreciated a good sense of humor, and unlike my dad, Dr. King was a joke teller. He understood that humor and a good joke are often necessary, especially when used to make a serious point or underline one. From my own study of civil rights history, I knew that at the last Southern Christian Leadership Conference meeting, the night before they were about to go do something incredibly dangerous, that not everyone around that table might make it back from, Dr. King would deliver a humorous eulogy for everyone around the table that would often seize on a physical characteristic or a character trait and gently poke fun at it. I had the honor of interviewing Ambassador Andrew Young, Dr. King's chief aide and right-hand man, when I was in Atlanta this past June, conducting interviews for the documentary Tamar and I are producing about our dad. Andy spoke from this pulpit 6 or 7 years ago as the speaker at Temple Beth Tikvah's Tikkun Olam lecture series in Dad's honor, and now in his memory. And he will also be delivering one of the eulogies on one of the nights of the Zoom Shiva. He'll actually be speaking on Thursday night, and I'll say a few more words about how the Shiva is going to work maybe later on when Rabbi Mika's making announcements. Anyway, knowing that funny eulogy story, I asked Andy what Dr. King would have said if he had delivered such a eulogy for my dad. Andy lit up, and he thought for a moment, and he said something along the lines of the following, and I admit I'm embellishing just a little. Rabbi Cy Dresner was cut down by an assassin's bullet today, which was very unlucky for Cy, but very lucky for Dr. King that Cy was so tall. Though you wouldn't know it from his final years, my dad really was tall. He was a legitimate 6'2". And Andy said it was always easy to spot him in the crowd. But he went on to say that his physical stature was matched and surpassed by his moral stature. My dad cast a long shadow his whole life, and that shadow is now cast over our lives. But there's no shadow without light, and Cy Dresner was a light and a heat illuminating the dark and lighting the way for others. His candle has been extinguished, but his light has not. He lit the torch of so many others. I know this for a fact because I've heard it time and time again in the countless emails I've received over the last few weeks. My dad began passing the torch to me about half a dozen years ago when we started appearing together at various speeches and events. At this point, at least from a pure storytelling standpoint, I can tell his stories better than he could, and certainly shorter than he could. His life is over. But I will be telling, and more importantly, living his stories for the rest of my life. And I hope you will too.
At this time, I'd like to invite everyone to take just a couple of moments of silent reflection in honor of this precious human being, Rabbi Cy Dresner. God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but God, you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you, the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is a dwelling place of your love and glory. At this time, as we come to the conclusion of this part of our final goodbyes to our Rabbi Emeritus Cy Dresner, I'd like to invite you to rise, if that is available to you today, as Cantor Ramalis will recite El Maleh Rechamim, God full of compassion.
El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Pameromim, Hamtzeinu Chanechona, Tachat Kanefei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Ki Zohar Harakia, Masirim, Edeni Shemat, Yisrael Shmuel ben Avraham v'Tamar, Shalach L'olamo. Baal harachamim yastirehu, B'seter kinafav l'olamim, בצרור החיים נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Rabbi Dresner, Israel Shmuel ben Avraham v'Tamar, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he now rest in peace, and let us all say together as one community of grievers, Amen.
Amen.
And now I'd like to invite the pallbearers to come and stand next to the casket. Let's turn it around. And I will invite everyone to follow the family as we put the casket in the hearse. And then we shall all caravan. For those of you who are joining us at the cemetery, feel free to join us in driving one car after the other, following the hearse, myself, and immediate family. And we will see you there. Shiva Arrangements include nightly Zoom Shiva. Feel free to Zoom in every night, starting tonight at 7 p.m. We would love to have you there. And as Avi mentioned earlier, each night there will be 2 or 3 speakers to deliver more eulogies in honor and memory of Rabbi Dresner.